Hey guys, taking a look here at section 10.6, solving equations, especially quadratic equations, by using what's called the quadratic formula. We've looked at a lot of different methods for solving quadratics. We can factor it and use the zero product property. We can graph it and see its x-intercepts. We can use the square root on both sides. We can complete the square. What we're looking at today is and some of you might be happy about this, the final way that I'm going to teach you to solve these quadratic equations, and it's by using something called the quadratic formula. Again, the formula. Let me get this written because I can't talk and write at the same time. A formula is just, it's an equation that does a specific job. All right, we've got the distance formula. There's formulas for area. Lots of different formulas, Fahrenheit and Celsius. So all it is it's an equation that solves a quadratic equation. All right, and so here's the quadratic formula. So if we have a quadratic equation written in this form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So if we've got this quadratic equation that's set equal to 0, and a is the coefficient of your x squared term, b is the coefficient of your x term, and c is your constant, what the quadratic formula says is that your solutions for x will take this form, or you can use this formula to find those. Now, don't freak out when you see this thing. It's actually not too bad once you kind of get used to working with it. All right, so here it is. It's the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac entirely divided by 2a. Okay, there's the quadratic formula. All right, so if you have a value for a value for b, and a value for c, it's simply replacing those values in here in the appropriate spot, and then we're going to use order of operations to simplify it. Okay, now we're going to look at a couple examples, and notice we are kind of splitting this up into 2 days. All right, I'll talk about that here in just a little bit. So it says use the quadratic formula to solve this equation, and we might get some irrational answers, so it does say round to the nearest hundredth if necessary. We'll look at this. All right, so the first thing to realize here is, we got to get our equation set equal to 0, and that's done. All right, and it said a is the coefficient in front of your squared term, b is the coefficient in front of your x term, and then c is your constant. Now I know we're using z's here instead of x's, but that doesn't change anything. So this is already written in the form that we want. Now again, I'm going to, where I see that -7 and that -2, I'm going to make those plus negative. All right, but a here has a value of 4 because that's the coefficient of my z squared term. B has a value of -7, and c has a value of -2. All right, so I've got my value for A, I've got my value for B, I've got my value for C, just pulled right here from this equation. And so I'm just going to fill them in this formula here. All right, so here we go. So I start off with the opposite of B. Well, if B is -7, the opposite of -7 is 7. All right, plus or minus, and we've seen that before, so that shouldn't be too new to you. The square root of B squared, so that's -7 squared, minus 4 times A times C, and that whole thing is divided by 2 times A. So all I've done there is I've gone to the quadratic formula, and I've replaced A with 4, B with -7, and C with -2. And now this is an order of operations problem. All right, so order of operations, the first thing I do are grouping symbols, and this square root is a grouping symbol. So what order of operations says is you have to do everything underneath. And now if I look at underneath, as I look at what to do underneath, exponents comes before multiplication and subtraction. So the first thing I want to do is that exponent. So I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to do -7 to the second power, and -7 to the second power is +49. And I'm actually just going to leave everything else the same. All right. As you get more comfortable with these, you might be able to start to do more steps at a time, but for right now we're going to take our time. Although I am going to go ahead and multiply under here. All right, because again, I forgot to mention this division bar is also a grouping symbol. It says do everything up top and then do everything on the bottom, and then finally we're going to divide. Okay. Now I might run out of room here, but I'll just flip it over and do it on the back, or we'll make do with this. So I still want to work under the grouping symbol. So under this grouping symbol, I've got subtraction and I've got multiplication. Multiplication comes before subtraction, and I'm going to work left to right. So 4 times 4 is 16, times -2 is -32. All right, so I've got 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 minus, what did I say that was? -32. And it's still divided by 8. Now I'm still working underneath the grouping symbol. So underneath the grouping symbol, I want to do 49 minus -32, or I could look at that as 49 plus 32. So that is 7 plus or minus the square root of 81 over 8, or divided by 8. Probably a better way to say that. And now the square root of 81 is 9. And I'm going to continue this down here. So I've got 7 plus or minus 9 over 8. So now remember, we're always expecting to, and not always, but a lot of times we're expecting 2 answers on these. Because if you think of that parabola, most of them have two x-intercepts. All right, well, here are my 2 answers. 7 plus 9 divided by 8. And then 7 minus 9 divided by 8. Now again, you want to do this. This division symbol is this division bar is a grouping symbol. So you want to do the stuff up top first. So it's 7 plus 9, and hit your equals button on your calculator. You should get 16, and then divide by 8. That gives me one answer of 2. And then 7 minus 9, that's -2 divided by 8, -1/4. So there are my 2 solutions to that quadratic equation. Again, once you get it's finding that value for A, B, and C, plugging that information in, and then just follow your order of operations. And I would suggest you take your time. Don't get in a big hurry here. Okay. Now let's look at one other example here. So I got 3n squared minus 5n equals -1. Now, the first thing I notice is that's not equal to 0. So to use the quadratic formula, just like we do with a lot of these, we get it equal to 1 at first. And I'm going to write a little bit smaller this time, or I'm going to try to, just so I've got enough room. All right. And now since I've got it equal to 0, I've got my value for A, I've got my value for B, and I've got my value for C. A is 3, B is -5, because again, I can change this to plus -5, and C is 1. So I'm going to start filling that information in to my quadratic formula. So I do the opposite of B. Again, B is -5. The opposite of -5 is 5. Now let me just pause right there, because I notice in my 2 examples, B is negative. All right, so the opposite of a negative is a positive. If in this case, if B would have been 7, the opposite of 7 is -7, and that just simply would have changed that. All right, but here we go. We keep going. Plus or minus the square root of B squared. So that's -5 squared minus 4 times A times C. And that whole thing divided by 2 times A. So again, all I've done in this first step is take my quadratic formula, and I've replaced A, B, and C with the values that I got from this equation. And now let's do some order of operations. So I want to work under here first. I want to do that exponent. So it's 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 4 times 3 times 1. And that whole thing divided by 6. So I've done the exponent, and I've also done the multiplication in the bottom. Now I'm going to do this multiplication. Order of operations tells me to. 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 12 over 6. Now this is still a grouping symbol, so I've got to work in there. 25 minus 12 is 13. So I get 5 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 6. And now my square root of 13 is going to be an irrational number. The square root of 81 was rational. It gave me 9. I got 2 pretty answers. But we've seen sometimes these quadratics, sometimes those parabolas have irrational x-intercepts, and this is one of those cases. But again, I'm still going to get two answers. I'm going to get 5 plus the square root of 13 divided by 6, and I'm going to get 5 minus the square root of 13 divided by 6. And again, just make sure it's almost like these are in parentheses. So make sure when you're typing it in your calculator, if you type in your calculator 5 plus the square root of 13 divided by 6, it's going to do that division problem and then add 5 to your answer. So you have to put in 5 plus the square root of 13, hit equals, and then divide by 6. All right, now let me show you. My calculator is going to look, again, a little bit different from yours. So I do 5 plus the square root of 13, and I hit equals, and I get that irrational number, and then I divide it by 6. Now they asked us to round to the nearest hundredths, so it's about 1 and 43 hundredths is what you should get for that one. And now I want to do this one, all right? So it's 5 minus the square root of 13. I hit equals, get that big irrational number, and then divide that by 6. And then again, to the nearest hundredth, about 23 hundredths. All right, 0 and 23 hundredths. And again, x is about that here. And again, those are two, what I don't want you to miss in all the math here, these are solutions to this equation. These are two values for n that if I would put them in here, they would make that equation true. All right, solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Get it equal to 0, find your value for A, find your value for B, find your value for C, plug them in the appropriate place, and then do order of operations. All right. I understand these are pretty lengthy problems, so I've only given you these 4 problems here. So take a look at those. Now, I did split this up into 2 days, so you're not going to see a flip grid topic just yet. I'm going to have you combine the next assignment with this and then just turn it all in on one. All right, but take a look at these. I'll get the answers posted, and you can let me know if there's any questions that you have on these. But work your way through these 4, and like I said, we'll post these on Flipgrid all at once. All right, so hope that helps. Hope that makes sense. Have fun with this. Take care.